Australia told parents its new law would force the big platforms to take reasonable steps to stop under-16s from holding social media accounts. 3 months in, about 42% of the 10 to 15-year-olds surveyed still reported having one. And among the children who kept their accounts, about half said the platform never asked them to prove their age. Account ownership did fall by about 10 percent points, and that's a real change. But use of the platforms barely moved. So the question isn't whether the technology to check someone's age exists. Australia actually tested that thoroughly, and we'll get to what it found. The question is whether the law made anyone use it. Pull up a seat, regulars. I've been through the legislation, the finished technology trial, and the first real world results. The technology is more capable than those numbers make it look. The way Australia implemented it is a lot less reassuring. One disclosure, I research this channel using AI tools, including this episode. No conflict, just so you know the method. Two things are true here, and most coverage just picked one. Platforms did act. By mid-December 2025, around 4.7 million accounts, assessors belonging to under-16s had been removed, deactivated, or restricted. Those are figures eSafety published in January this year. Roughly another 300,000 by early March. There are about 5 million Australians under 16. On the face of it, that's nearly all of them. But read through it properly, because eSafety does, it counts accounts, not children. Kids hold accounts across several platforms, so one child can appear in it more than once. Some may have already been inactive. A real action, just smaller than the headlines imply. Then the survey. eSafety is running a 2-year evaluation, a baseline taken just before restrictions started, then follow-ups. The first installment was published on the 31st of July, covering the 3-month mark, from a paired sample of just over 800 children aged 10 to 15, and their parents. Ownership fell from about 52% to 42%, statistically significant drops on YouTube, Snapchat, and TikTok in particular. But use of an age-restricted platform fell from about 86% to 81.5%. 10 points off accounts, 4 points off use. Part of that gap is structural. The law governs accounts. It doesn't govern every way a child can watch something. Logged out browsing isn't restricted. But the report can't tell us how much of the gap is logged out viewing and how much is incomplete enforcement. Both are in there, but nobody can say what the ratio is. Here's the thing about how this law came together. Parliament passed the ban before the government's own technology trial had finished, but not before the testing had begun. The trial was commissioned in November 2024. The people running it were told to start immediately and report by the middle of the following year. 6 days later, the bill was introduced. 8 days after that, it passed through both houses. The final trial report arrived 9 months later, August 2025. So the tender was awarded, then the law was passed, then the results came in. Not reckless exactly, but Parliament committed to the obligation while the evidence about whether it could actually be met was still being gathered. And that distinction matters, because when the trial did report, it did not say age assurance was impossible. It said several methods could work, with errors, with privacy trade-offs, and with some genuinely difficult decisions about people sitting right near the threshold. Which is what we should look at next, because it's the most important part nobody covered. 48 vendors, more than 60 separate systems, lab testing, school-based trials, mystery shoppers, eSafety turned it into reasonable steps guidance a month later. The yardstick platforms now measured against. It tested 4 different things that all get called age checks. And the difference matters. Verification, checking a document issued from an authority with a date of birth. Estimation, the AI one. A model reads a face or a voice and predicts an age. Some return an estimate, some a threshold decision. Inference, which is working it from other signals, history, connections, behaviors, parental consent, and adult vouchers. The headline was that this can be done. 2 conditions matter enormously here. Uncertainty concentrates around the gate. The trial found the highest uncertainty within roughly 2 to 3 years either side of the threshold, and recommend fallback verifications inside the band. The best performing systems average errors of about 1.5 years. Australia's gate is 16, so the band of greatest uncertainty covers roughly 14 to 18, the ages the law is actually most important for. The trial also recommended some higher false positive rates for people with darker skin, while noting aggregate differences stayed within the fairness threshold it had set. And no single method is enough. Its central recommendation was layering, successive validation, escalating to a stronger check when the first one isn't confident. So the honest summary was never the AI solved this. It was this works as a system if somebody builds the system, which brings us back to the survey. A caution before the numbers, because it's the reason this episode exists. These are survey answers from children, not measurements from platforms. Children could pick more than one explanation, so the figures overlap. They're not three separate groups, and the survey doesn't record which kind of check produced which outcome. Among children who still held at least one restricted account, a subset of around 350, half said they had never been asked to confirm their age. Around 33% said their account listed them as 16 or over. Now let's be precise. That establishes what the account said, not when or how the age got there. Some will predate the ban entirely. Around 18% said a check had incorrectly classified them as 16 or older. Careful with that last one, because it's the number I'd most like to be about the technology. And I can't tell you that it is. The survey doesn't say whether those were facial estimations, inference, a document, or a birthday field. Anyone calling it an AI error is reading into something that isn't there. And given this episode is about misclassification, I'm not doing that. The first number also needs a caveat too. Some age assurance runs invisibly in the background, so never asked doesn't prove no system ran. What it establishes is that no visible, effective intervention reached these account holders. eSafety treats it as evidence of ineffective implementation, and I think that's the right reading. The dominant report problem wasn't a sophisticated system being beaten. It was that the child never encountered an active check. There's a finding in eSafety's March 2026 compliance report that deserves far more attention than it got. At least one platform contacted users who had already declared themselves under 16 and invited them to complete age assurance so they could change their age on their account. The stated reason is legitimate, and I want to give it properly. An adult might have genuinely entered the wrong birthday years ago and be about to lose an account they're entitled to. Offering a correction path is reasonable. eSafety's concern was what else the invitation did. It reached actual 14 and 15-year-olds and encouraged them to have a go. And on some platforms, a user could keep attempting the same method until they got a result over 16. Run that as a system, an age estimate has a known uncertainty band. Let someone retry inside that band as often as they like, and eventually the noise falls their way. That isn't a limitation of the technology. It's a decision about how the technology was deployed. 3 months after commencement, parents were less likely to know their child was using social media, up from about 23% to 33%. eSafety calls this a potential unintended consequence. That doesn't prove the law caused it, but the regulator spells out why it's a warning. A parent who doesn't know their child is on a platform is less likely to spot a problem early, and the child is less likely to come to them when something goes wrong. That's the mechanism by which use moving out of sight can cost you more than use itself. Alongside it, messaging went up. Daily or more messaging rose from about 40% to 52%, and an early sign that some activity may be shifting rather than stopping. And on wellbeing, the measures were unchanged at 3 months, which is what the report expected. Nobody designing this thought mental health would move in a quarter, and I'm not going to pretend that's a finding either. The Commission's position is that this is unwinding 20 years of entrenched practice, and the real measure is generational. That's fair. I'd hold her to that over the 2-year evaluation rather than this one report. Before I draw a conclusion, here's the strongest case that Australia got this right. The sequence was deliberate. Parliament didn't prescribe facial scanning or any other technology. It imposed an outcome and left the method open. That's why the Act talks about reasonable steps rather than naming a system. It gave platforms a 12-month transition. The trial reported 3 months before commencement, and the regulator's guidance a month after that. On that reading, the evidence arrived in time to inform implementation, and Australia avoided the much worse outcome of freezing one technology into legislation while the field was still moving. And the alternative explanation for what went wrong isn't the timeline at all. It's that some platforms had workable tools available and implemented them badly. This evaluation can't tell us which mattered more. I'm not going to pretend it can. Since March this year, eSafety has had compliance concerns about 5 services in particular: Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, and YouTube. In Senate estimates, it confirmed it has retained external legal counsel. Penalties run into the tens of millions per contravention, and the government has moved to lift the maximum and widen the regulator's information, gathering powers. There's been movement too. Some platforms went back and rechecked accounts whose stated age jumped to 16 around commencement, and some apps raised their App Store age rating. Now, here's 4 things for the next report. Were users actually prompted? Not whether a policy existed, but what proportion encountered a check. Was it layered? The trial was explicit that one check isn't age assurance. A birthday field certainly isn't. Retries need a limit. And are error rates published by platform, by method, by age band? We're inferring the performance of a consequential technology from what children remember about it. And finally, what moved? If activity shifts to messaging or logged out viewing, the account number is measuring the wrong thing. So, did it work? Partly. And the honest version is untidy. Fewer children reported having accounts, and that's a real change that other countries should take seriously. But most still used social media. Too many of the children who kept their accounts said nothing ever asked them to prove their age. Parents got less informed, wellbeing hadn't moved, which nobody expected. The government's own trial says age assurance can work. It also says there's no perfect invisible system that catches every 15-year-old without errors and without privacy trade-offs. That system doesn't exist, and the trial never claimed it. Australia didn't prove a technology was ready and then build a law around it. It passed a broad obligation, left platforms to decide what reasonable steps meant, and expected implementation to close the gap. 3 months in, the gap is still there. So the ban isn't useless, it's just not the clean wall parents were told they were getting. And the next report is the one that tells us whether it ever will be. And I'll cover it. If you like this content, hit like and subscribe, stick around. We cover AI content in Australia, and I'll see you another time.